All right. So someone had mentioned, Sierra had mentioned actually. So what we do is pretty much wearing a ton of hats. If you're writing, if you're producing, if you're performing, engineering, obviously those are all very different things to kind of get acquainted with and learn as much as you can about. And mixing itself is one of the most in-depth maelstrom of concepts and things to learn. It's its own profession, and all of these things are their own profession. But for those of you in this right now, to get a better grasp on mixing, it requires us to kind of take off the other hats because this is its own art form. This is its own approach to things. It's when I talk about mixing, the arrangement's done, the stems are edited, everything is ready to go. And I think that kind of lends me into like the first thing that we're going to kind of discuss before we even get into low end, which is just basic organization and understanding gain staging. Because those two things are going to like square off your mix so that you're building from a really solid platform. And this is a compounded experience, meaning that we start, you can start ground up or top down. Those two things are different approaches, meaning ground up, your rhythm section, your low end into melodic components, into kind of the excess frill, or top down, starting with the vocals, which is, typically going to be the focal point of any song with them, and then working around them and back down into that rhythmic. So for the sake of this tutorial, we're doing bottom up, and we're going to start with low end, obviously. But before we get into that, and please forgive me, guys. I don't like the reason I'm decent at this job is because my brain will go to 16 different places at once, and I will just start adjusting things in this very chaotic order. And somehow to me, it makes complete and utter sense. But in a teaching setting, that can be kind of problematic because you're like, what the hell is this guy doing? And why did he just jump to that? Why is he going to there? So I'll try to essentially just like dictate my inner monologue as much as I can. And we might jump around a little bit. And if I do fly too far off, someone like raise a hand and be like, how did we get here? Can we please backtrack a little bit? Because I will. And I will apologize profusely on the way that we go back. And then I will get back on track. Anyways, starting a mix is gain staging. Gain staging is just the like incredibly important concept of bringing everything to a nominal volume and balancing all that volume within like a relative sense of each other. So how do we do that? How many of you guys, well, do we have Logic users in-house, like anybody working directly in Logic? Okay. And then a fair amount of Ableton, I would imagine. Sweet. Anyone diving deep into the Pro Tools, you know, playland, as we would call it? That's okay. What I'm really going to try to do, because I don't want this to turn into like, yeah, I really, oh, Studio One, sweet. That works as well. Accurate, sweet. Um, what I don't want this to turn into is a Logic tutorial, because it's not going to serve any of you guys to just figure out how to do it on a program that you're not working out of. And as we all know, like if you're an Ableton person, you spent all your time learning how to use that DAW. You're not going to like bounce over and do that over again, because I've spent 20 years in Logic at this point, and it's, and Pro Tools. And so when people are like, do you use Ableton? I'm like, I don't have time, man. I'm still learning how to do stuff on both of these programs. So don't get intimidated if this is a DAW that you're not familiar with, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about things in a way that kind of makes sense no matter what DAW you're applying them in. So with gain staging in Logic, however, it's just this is to articulate the concept. What we're going to do is we're going to look back at each one of these files, and we're going to find a way. In Ableton, I believe you do this with the utility plugin to begin your chain. You can kind of drag down. In Logic, this is just a region gain function. Pro Tools is other ways. Studio One, I believe it's similar, where it's like you have a region gain function. Anyways, you're going to essentially, whether you do this with processing or just listening and watching your meters, my goal is always to kind of have a peak of every single element of your track hit at -12. Now, the reason behind this is essentially one that has been carried over from like grandfather analog days. Analog software or analog hardware, excuse me, used to process signal at -18. It used to route signal through it. So, like, if you came in hotter than that, you were essentially creating a clipping distortion. You were saturating your signal. You were coloring it in some way. And we did that all the time, and we do that all the time still for color characteristics, but you're always looking to shoot the signal in at roughly -18, meaning the peak of your signal can be forgiven at about -12. So I know that's an odd sense of mathematics, but this is actually it's actually rooted in something, and it's rooted in the way analog equipment was built. And so when we do this now, we build in a digital platform, we're building up something from a very low volume and keeping it a relatively low volume so that we're maintaining fidelity through the entire process. Because modern signal nowadays is pretty lossless. If you're putting saturation in or you're doing something like that, it's on purpose and it's to create a sound. And so when you're in the mixing stage, all that sound creation should be done. It's an odd feeling, and I know a lot of you guys like are producing your own stuff and mixing your own stuff, and it's tempting to be arranging a song and mixing it at the same time. And I am, believe me, the most guilty, I think, of that. I was always a mix as you go arranger and producer, and whether it was working on satsang stuff with Drew or working on my own stuff or working with artists that like if they're allowing me this much freedom, I have a tendency to mix it as I go. My justification for that is always like, well, I want it to sound nice, like as I'm working on it. I want to be able to listen back and have a representation of it that's closest to what I'm hoping to hear. But in reality, that's going to lead to just a ton of problems with your mix itself. Because there's things that as you add will change the profile, and then you're always problem solving against the next problem that you created. So my suggestion to eliminate that from happening is essentially just doing the arrangement kind of, if you want to mix as you go so that you get a better sense of what you're doing, that's fine, but find a point where the arrangement itself is done and rebounce all those tracks just with all the effects that they have and anything that is tonally helping the song. Keep that in, bounce them, re-upload them into a new session, and mix that session without the temptation of adding anything or anything, because all this is now set in stone. And so as you're gain staging this now, you're gain staging all of these things together, and you're bringing all of them to a place of like true fidelity and building into volume. And don't let the loudness wars fool you. I hear so many mixes that are destroyed by slamming them into a limiter. Wait for mastering. Just turn up the volume on your source, or throw a limiter on, but don't squash it. Just bring it up so that you can put it through something else and listen back to it and appreciate like where your levels are. Because if you push anything through a limiter just to get it sent off or anything like that, your mix has now suffered immensely. So from like a professional standpoint, like where we start is gain staging, and we do that for every reason I just explained. I'm not going to get too far into the depths of it. I would shoot, again, try to keep your peaks at about -12, meter things on the way out. But I want to spend more time, obviously, now that I've gotten my little speech about gain staging, and I appreciate all your patience listening to that. Let's get into some low-end stuff. Conceptually, you have to think about all this, and I was telling you guys earlier, I know it might seem a little odd at first because we're going to be doing a lot more talking of things than we are like actually diving into plugins, but it has purpose, I promise you. Low end occupies a very specific frequency range, and obviously it moves at a very, very slow, like a much slower pace than a high frequency. We understand that as engineers, we understand that as artists, hopefully we understand that just in general as people. But with that being said, it means there's a lot more opportunity to crowd your low end, because your low end is traveling at a slower rate than the rest of things. It's being received later. So with that being said, there's overlap, there's places that frequencies can build that just essentially what they'll do is they'll either mask, meaning the two frequencies combine, collect, and remove each other, or they will build. And when they build, they create a washy sense in your mix. Like this is where we get muddiness. This is where we get this overwhelming sense of like, it was such a clear mix, and then I bounced it, and then I put it into my car, and my car has like a great low end response. And man, it was just like, and that is frustrating. And so the first decision you make when you're mixing a song is who's going to take up my subs? Because only one thing really is going to be taking up your subs. So in this particular song, I'm going to I told Adam I'd do this, and again, I got away from myself. We're going to listen to this whole mix. I have not mixed this entire song. I've gain staged it. I've balanced the mix against itself. And I've gone over some of the concepts and touched on some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But in reality, if we look at this is about the plugins I'm using on the song. And to be honest, most songs I mix look similar. Maybe not so much of a gap in this area, but there's not a lot of plugins because you don't need them. If you guys are working in electronic music, if you're doing in sound creation online, like on your computer, all in the box, you are not going to need a ton of plugins because those are being compressed, they're being attenuated, they're being EQ'd, they come out, they bounce as MIDI. So anything that you're going to do to them in a mixing stage is going to be essentially to account for problems or tonality.
Interesting.
So most of this is just going to be, we have pretty much a wider range of things that Thane threw down, and I did my best to organize them. Kicks, percussion, sub elements, keys, guitars, horns, and they're all bus mixed into a mix bus and a vocal bus. And we can talk about that if you guys would like to hear about it later. And I can explain that concept as how to tuck vocals into a mix at the end of our vocal mixing portion. So sit back, refamiliarize yourself with this song, and here it is.
Well, you could let it all unravel, and you could let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside. Oh, I'm learning every time I come around. And oh, I'm learning every time I come around.
If you could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song. We are stronger than we think, so may we learn to love our ego. We give it the love it really needs, so we can let it go and breathe. Facing it all, feeling the deepest times of the old we've been believing. Under the surface, the mask we wear, there is a love to which nothing compares. Tangled in past until we dismantle, grounding this down till we get a handle. Facing the sun, the nights come undone. Spread your wings, see what you become.
I'm learning every time I come around. And oh, I'm learning every time I come around. Well, you could let it all unravel, and you could let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside. And you could let it all unravel, and you can let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside. And you can let it all unravel, and you can let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside.
All right.
So great.
All right. That is what we're working on today. That is it done already with low-end treatment and vocal treatment, and actually nothing else. So this is kind of just evident as to why something as simple as gain staging can be a very helpful thing in your mix. Because if you're looking at what I've got just basic little patches kind of up on the drums, because those are usually things that need taming, controlling, and a little bit on the bass. Actually, to be quite honest, I don't think we did very much to the bass, because the bass was done all MIDI, and it was not conflict. Once we had the kick controlled, and once we had established what we needed with the kick, the bass had room. And as soon as the bass has room, you don't need to be messing with it unless you want to change the way it actually sounds. And then we get ourselves into some vocal chains over here and reverbs and what have you. But in reality, this is what we did to the mix. If you know, if I could show you other sessions where this is just all this. And oftentimes I think we get, easily duped by plugins. And it's because they're fun and because they can change the sound. But if you're switching your producer hat into a mixing engineer hat, you have to start making this kind of agreement with yourself that anything you're doing is intentional. You should know why you're putting a compressor on. You should know why you're throwing EQ on. You should have a problem in your mind and you're attempting to fix it. If there are no problems, don't make them, because that is the quicksand that will take what could be a very dynamic, really clean, fun, energetic sounding mix, and then you get so far down and you're like listening to it and it feels completely away from you. And that is like that gut feeling where you're like, oh man. And then you either attempt to start it over or you're gonna spend all that extra time fixing it. And doing this professionally, like, our time is valuable and yours is too. Like, if you're wearing all those hats, even if you're just producing and remixing a song like Thane did here, like, you're still doing all the things of the artist. You're just taking art that was given to you and collaging it in a different way that is your self-expression and your voice being put into it. And the mixing engineer does the exact same thing. Is why different mixing engineers to get different jobs is we hear things differently. So the other big part of this is nothing I tell you tonight is set in stone or necessarily the way to do this. It's my way of doing this. And you can take my way of doing this and explore this in different concepts in different settings, because setting, and context are everything in this element of what we do as engineers and producers and all this stuff. So it's always going to change, and you're always going to have to look back on what you know and utilize that. And so getting back into it, sub range. I think when it came down to it, this song has so much. I'm gonna swear, guys. I hope that's okay with everybody. But this song is, and I have a tendency to throw that out, especially when I'm a little nervous, which I am right now because I've never had so many like faces on my computer screen. Just
Yeah, swearing is our cultural currency, man. You're
cool.
complete permission.
This song has so much fucking low end. It made me really, really, really nervous when I first heard it because I was like, I don't know if I have enough time, guys. Like, there's just like, there is the element of time, and this is like just wobble central. Like, I feel like every time I listen to this, I'm like, the boat's rocking. And it's great, but that means there's a lot to control here. Even these elements. But the two elements that we're really, really focused on right now is the interaction between these two. I'm counting all of these sub-layered wobbles as one right now, which is why I have them all kind of bus mixed together. But to me, these are going to be the two competing elements of this song no matter what, when it comes to this section of the frequency spectrum. So what we do before anything is we gain stage it, we get all the volumes down, and then we start figuring out, all right, what's our first problem that we're going to solve? And it's usually, if you're working in this fashion from the ground up, it's going to be your low end. And there's two things that competing are going to be trying to fight for the sub range, and we can only pick one. So in these two elements, I think we had decided based off what I'm looking at here that
Can I tap in really quick, Carl?
absolutely.
If you guys are not on like studio headphones, if you happen to have some, it's totally cool if you don't. I totally get it. If you happen to have some, it would be a good time to grab them because Thane's mix is very sub heavy.
Yeah.
And a lot of those frequencies, you're gonna hear them in a car, you're gonna hear them on your like stereo, you're gonna hear them rocking in the club, all the normal festivals, but you probably are going to miss a lot in a laptop as far as low end stuff. So before Carl dives into it, just a brief disclaimer: if you have some and handy, you might grab them.
Thank you. That is an incredibly good point. Most of this information on your headphones is lost, which is why we always cross-reference against like cell phones nowadays, which is my least favorite part of the job, because if you want to know how badly you've done with something, you will hear it on a cell phone. And through a nice set of headphones and through a nice set of monitors, everything's like, oh, well, it's kicking. It sounds good. And then it hits the phone and you're like, why does this song sound like it's got no bass? So that being said, back on, we decided when we were looking at these two elements between the sub wobble and the kick, that the sub wobble obviously gets the prize of the sub range. All the information sits in this, as we can see. I'll just clip out a little section here.
So you mean like the sub instead of the kick?
I mean the sub. So when I'm referencing sub in the next kind of little section that I'm going to go over here, I'm talking more about just the representation in the entire mix itself. So like anything from essentially 30 hertz down, just for the entirety of the mix. Once you put every element in, where this little section from 30 hertz down really should only be represented by one musical element. Because if we start trying to throw more musical elements, if I have sub information in my kick and then sub information in this sub wobble bass line that he's got, we're going to lose both of them. Both get sacrificed in some sort of way as far as your ability to read it as a listener, its impact, its like progressive push in a mix, and masking will occur at like exorbitant rates. So you will start losing that information, and in order to compensate for that loss, you'll start boosting the volume. And then as soon as we do that, we end up accidentally washing out pretty much everything up to about 300 hertz. And that's like, these things are always kind of, as a mixing engineer only, this is what you're thinking about all the time. You're thinking about a fair representation of every element in the song, but where they exist in this broad range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. and different, obviously, like as a musician, like your instrument lies in a very specific subrange. Granted, your particular instrument, Flint, lies in a very, very large spectrum of things. It's more equivocal to a piano, in that sense. You can draw a lot of low end information from what you play and a lot of high end information. But most of the time, a guitar is going to sit in its little box of where it's coming up in the frequency range. A bass is going to do the same, a kick is going to do the same. And the things that most people struggle with in the beginning is this relationship between their kick and their bass and getting both to shine through. And so I think as a mixing engineer, your first decision in your mix is who gets that kind of coveted space in the submix. If you're doing electronic music, most of the time, that's gonna be your bass, because like you want to feel it, and we put so much rhythmic quality into the bass, especially in electronic music, that you want that to be felt, heard, and conveyed through your mix. The kick is there to give you something to feel and keep time as those elements are playing with each other and with other elements of the mix. So in this particular mix, we were thinking, obviously, it all goes down into pretty much these two elements, this little wub. And that's sitting, and it's funny because this is what I'm talking about. This little annoying, section. It's not large, it's not a lot, but it can do so much to your mix, and it can just either hurt or help.
What up? Dog meat. Just being dog meat. Made
All
like
right.
$60. Yeah, bro. Who was all working with you? It was me,
that?
Casey, and John.
Who we got? There we go. All right. So 30 hertz and down, and it's not doing much, but it's enough. And it doesn't. It just does. All I'm talking about is when I put this in, I need to be able to hear and feel this, and have them exist in the same space with the same push. Now, I can give this more, but when it hits, any kind of small conflict I'm having, this is the bass itself, is not going to be existent. Usually these red kind of overlaps in Fab Filter, I don't know how many of you guys use this EQ, you'll see conflict if you sidechain it to other things. Once I find my kick, because as you can imagine, he gave me a lot of stuff. You know what? Trust me on that one. So once we've decided what's going to sit in that sub range, then we get to move on into the balance of everything. Usually I like starting with my kick, just because obviously it's the timekeeper of the song. It's going to be driving most things. And so essentially we want to shape this and get this to a place where we're feeling good about it. This kick itself was pretty... You can hear a small crackle at the end. But it's thumpy. And so in order to just kind of temper and tame it, I threw a gate on it. Now, if you know what a gate is, it's just opening, allowing the signal to come through. As soon as the threshold is released, it drops everything out. There's plenty of different ones. Usually your range is set to infinity. It's just so it takes out everything, but you can slope it, you can shape it, you can make this on. If you want to learn more about gates, it's a relatively quick tutorial on YouTube, or you can just email me and we can sit and chat about it, and I'd love to talk your ear off about it. But in this, I'm trying to go for efficiency, so I'm going to jump over concepts kind of quick. The next thing I did was just shave out that 30 hertz and down relative, because I just, again, don't want that information to be competing with what we've established as going to be the bass filling up that space. And then the last thing I did to this kit was add saturation to it. Now, this is one saturation plugin. There's another one called BB2s from Waves. There's a couple from Soundworks that are pretty great. I think Decapitator is a great one. You can find kind of any saturation plugin, and even in Logic, I believe there's a couple like in FatFX, or sorry, I don't use these too often. Bass Enhancer, yeah, there you go. But you'll be able to find them. And what saturation does is saturation is essentially adding harmonics to a signal. So it's allowing certain like parts of that signal to be shown through and develop, and you'll add harmonics to something, and certain analog gear and emulations add a different set of harmonics to them, and that's why you would pick different ones. I picked Saturn II from FabFilter because we have a lot of control over what we're going to do with this. And so when I was listening to this kick, I wanted thump, but I wanted it to stick through the mix a little bit more. So what I did is I sat and I went to the top end, and I took about anything above 400 hertz, and I just added a little bit of drive to it. Because that's essentially what drive is going to do. It's going to add harmonic distortion. And as it adds harmonic distortion, we get to feel it cut through a mix. And this is a really good way of cutting through a mix without clouding a mix or relying on that simple trick that we always seem to do, which is just pushing up the volume. We're really fighting the urge with all of this stuff to push volume. It's kind of the last, once you balance a mix, pushing volume is going to be your last ditch effort to get something to shine through. Think of this as putting together a puzzle. It shouldn't be a loudness wars within yourself. It should be, where does this fit? How do I get it to fit? And the difference between a good mix and a bad mix is usually the arrangement. It's not the mix. It's usually a bad mix will be a song that has too many elements of the same sound, too many guitars without balance in the low end and the top, too many vocals without balance in the low end and the low mids. And so when you're arranging as a producer, and think about this too, before you even get to this stage, think about instruments and elements that aren't being represented. If you have a lot of things on the top, you have a lot of percussion, shiny, clarity things, do something to balance that out. And try, the next element shouldn't be a clear, shiny thing. The next element should be a low, warm, fulfilling thing, unless you're like, and believe me, again, artist wins overall, subjectivity. Do what you want, but when you get to the stage, if you've done something with balance, you are doing yourself a huge service by like taking away this constant battle of like, how am I going to get these two things to work? Because that's what I do all day long, is just sit there and go, I have a violin, I have a beautiful set of like, 3-4 female vocals, like all sitting in this like very top shiny thing, and all I can hear is one element over the other. And I have no idea how to get that vocal to cut through the violin, or how to get that violin to cut through the vocals. And that's what a mixing engineer does, is he finds where in the mix it goes, how it balances against everything out. He plays with automation. He understands that, well, when she's singing, the violin shouldn't be right in front of your face. So I'm going to pull that back and then allow that to legato and build and crescendo up into the mix with volume and swells. So it's like everything is intentional in this space, guys. I can't press it enough. And when you start getting that way, you'll start doing less. Because if you're thinking with intentionality, and this is all outside, sorry, ADD moment, but this is all outside of like tone shaping. Like if you got to add 17 plugins to get the thing to sound like what's in your head, do that. That's fine. Then bounce it and work with it clean. That's it. That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm not talking about like, well, I added these 17 plugins because I wanted to sound like that. That's great. Do that all the time. Like, go nuts. This is a playground. Have fun. But when you're mixing it, you have to get into this technical mindset and this problem-solving, pragmatic kind of place. And a lot of people struggle with it. Like, I struggled with it for years because, I was very far up my own ass. And just like, I got this. This is fine. It's okay that there's 17 cellos and 17 fucking violins and 6 guitar layers, all on the same guitar with the same tone with the same mic recording. Like I did nothing to change anything because I thought it sounded amazing, and then I tried to mix it, and I risked like losing my computer because at every single 20 minutes I was like, I'm gonna throw this thing against a wall. Why can't I get to this to sound awesome? And it's because I just done too much and not given future Carl a little credit and been like, you know what, I'll make it easy on that guy, because producer Carl was pretty impetuous and he wanted what he wanted when he wanted it.
Dude,
So
if I can't put 17 guitars in this on the same guitar, same pickup, same tone, I'm
same
out.
everything.
I'm,
You're
I'm
out, dude.
closing this meeting, man. This session's officially done. Um, no, I love it. Wanna open it up briefly,
Sure.
just to tap in. Yeah, what are you guys, how are you tracking with this so far? What questions do you have? I know we're kind of getting into it. We're getting into the low end. I just want to touch in with you guys, give you a chance to ask any like clarifying questions that you have before we keep trucking along here. So does anyone have anything that to just make sure they're kind of understanding the process, or to have a question or anything like that? Let's open up a couple minutes for you guys to just ask any questions that are coming through.
Mr. Nate Jones, let's go.
Yeah, I do have a question. That was all really interesting from a very simple place, a simple point of view, not overcomplicating it. Like you said, it applies to all mixing, not just program specific things. I did not know that you could do the normalized gain function across regions. That's super cool. Thanks for that hack.
No problem.
And yeah, my main question was around, well, it's two part, and if you can't get to both, it's fine. But when you talked about coloration, you're talking about lossless formats that are available now where if you have harmonic distortion, whether it's even or odd order harmonic distortion, that there's fidelity for that, and that it's not being like clipped, and that the data is not being lost when you can mix in this way. Is that what you're saying? Like kind of recreating that analog freedom?
So yes and no. Like you're absolutely right in the sense that I am saying that you can essentially like you can create that. You can create this idea of things clipping. Like you can push things into plugins, into analog simulations to get a tonality shift out of them. But essentially in a lossless era, like even at a higher volume, you are getting like as much fidelity from the source as possible. It's like when we get samples, we get like effectively mastered samples. You know what I mean? Like they come in at louder volumes, they hit well, they're clear, they're crisp, all these things. But that's because of where technology has just essentially grown to the level that like we used to fight for back in the day with strictly analog gear. So in this context, like using saturation on the kick drum, I'm essentially just creating what would have been an analog kind of distorted feel by pushing it through that gear back in the day, but I'm doing that just simply digitally. And I'm simply adding that only to a very specific area of the kick so that when you're listening to the mix, it it that distorted sound totally disappears, but it's kind of recreated in the sense that now you can feel it and you can hear this slight punch through everything else. And it's because we're exciting these transients. We're allowing them to spark out of this mix. Does that make sense?
It does, and that it ties in perfectly to my other question, which was about the side chain, because like I know side chaining has become really popular since like some songs in the 80s and 90s, and like kind of getting that throbbing, pulsating
Absolutely.
feeling of like it's pretty much an automated ducking where each one is bowing to the other at any given moment.
Yeah. And that creates that solid pumping movement if that's what you're effectively going for. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been putting like a tube saturator, just a vintage tube EQ, after my simple EQ on just about everything, like before compression, before I do anything else. And just so if I were to do that in that low spectrum where it's saying like the low frequency knob, like I don't know if I can show you this, but right here,
Okay. Like an old Pultec.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if I've got this low boost, low attenuation here, can I set this frequency to what you're talking about right here?
Well, you can, but that's effectively going to alter the EQ of what you're doing, and then the transient coloration that comes through is built in because the Pultecs themselves had a sound, and so like the harmonics they added was just going through them. So now when you're attenuating and you're adding, you're actually adding or attenuating from that specific, like the Pultec saying, what is it, 10, 20. I forget what the actual dial increments are. But as you do that, you're either attenuating from or adding into that frequency range. And that will add both volume, like an EQ would, and then the inherent coloration that came with that piece of equipment. So it's like there's that age old, the Pultec punch. Like we add that because we're EQing some punch into it, but it also is being passively colored by that piece of equipment because it became famous because it had that harmonic distortion built into it. No matter what signal you ran it through was subject to that harmonic distortion. And we loved the sound of it. The color of it is perfect, especially for low end. Like it adds something very warm and exciting and retains clarity on a low end instrument that has very little information on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost reminded me of like the way Ringo's drums come through on like a Beatles album or something like that. Just like, yeah, that was my question. I don't want to take up too much time.
No,
but
it's a great question, and I appreciate like this is what we're talking about, and honestly, like this stuff can get confusing, and there's a lot of aspects I can take to describe all this stuff. I'm giving you guys a very broad overview of just kind of the first things I start thinking about when I dive into a mix, and then how I'm starting to like justify my decisions because I know things need to be done, but I don't know how to do them. Whoever's coloring on the screen is pretty fun. What is that? Dope. Anyways, moving on. Unless we've got more questions. Anyone got anything? We following my scatterbrain? Feeling good about it? Cool. Thanks, Devin. I appreciate
it. Just to kind of recap conceptually. So basically kind of what you're saying is like in a condensed way, you're kind of saying that, hey, there's this frequency that we call the subs.
Yep.
And this low frequency, which you're defining as what band exactly? 30 hertz?
From 30 hertz and under.
All right. So 30 hertz and under. Mm-hmm. Kind of what your point is that in that particular frequency range, having multiple musical elements or musical instruments like a bass or a kick ends up kind of muddying and taking away the power. So that is why in this case you actually shaved off everything below 30 from the kick, so that in this case the sub bass can speak in that frequency range. Is this the concept basically?
Absolutely. Nailed it down to a T. And just to capitalize kind of and build off what you were saying, now when we've done this, like conceptually, sub is so much more of a feeling based frequency spectrum. It's like that's why heads want to stand by the subs. They want to feel it in their chest, and so it's what element of the song do you want someone to feel before they hear it? You know what I mean? And so if you're thinking about it from a technical aspect, you want something either with movement in that, which is where we decided on this. We would rather feel the movement of the bass, or do we want, whatever it could, if you want to feel that movement in the kick, that kick slamming you in your chest, which you can accomplish without it existing in the subs, but you're guaranteeing it by including it in the subs. You know what I'm saying? And so with this, I think when I was talking to Thane about where he wanted things to exist, he was much more enticed by the idea of feeling that sub bass, in his chest, like feeling that wobble, because that the way he programmed the LFOs on that bass, he has movement to them. They're switching into a swung feel. They give it wah, 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 Well, they're acting as a percussive element in the song, and they're existing in a space that's often really competed for. And so we were just clearing all that up, and we're like, cool, that gets the chair. Now your kick. We're gonna figure out a way to insert the kick and feel it. Oh, admitting Freddie. All right, what's up, Nate?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I still had my hand
No,
raised.
it's all good. All right.
My
It,
apologies.
oh, it's all great, man. If we're let's get back into it. So here we're sitting with the kick. I've effectively put some saturation on the top so that when we put it against the sub bass, now it's cutting through well. You can hear a little of that crunch at the end. That's part of the sample he chose. I wasn't going to edit that out. Effect essentially too, because as we start adding different elements to the song, those two that little crunch is going to kind of disappear a little bit. And depending on how high up in the mix you want that element.
So have you already like used EQ to remove the sub from the kick itself? You
So
did that before. Okay,
did
yeah,
that right
I missed
here.
that part. Cool.
So, and we just took everything out, and now the kick, you'll see the principal frequency, and I cut it, I think, at 29 because I wanted like the main transient of that kick to still be present, and it's like right at the cusp there. It's about as much as I could take out of that kick with still having like its principal transient hitting and not being totally taken away from.
Yeah, it still sounds. It feels like it's still hitting.
It's still there, yeah, and you don't want to like you have to be discretionary, like, and you really like I know every engineer says it. You got to use your ears like more than your eyes. Like your eyes are gonna get you close, but then you have to start playing with it, and I do it often where I'll get this here and I'll just start dragging left and right with my eyes closed, so I can find a place where those two things exist in a well well enough to feel the kick and hear the kick against the sub, but still have the sub like totally present. Because this is just like we're working with low end is like just walking on ice. It at any point in time, this stuff can just fall from you, and then the entire mix gets washed out, and you're just left like sinking or swimming. So it gets hairy pretty quick. But I feel like with these two things we found.
You had it at like 30 hertz.
Here,
Yeah.
this was cut out at 29, 30 hertz,
Like
28.
like when that's played through like a sound system
Mhm.
at a show, that's still gonna hit the sub.
Oh, it's still gonna, yeah,
The
it's gonna hit the top
subwoofer.
of the it's gonna hit the top of the crossover, and so it's like it's still kicking through, but we're just like in a mix program, like the problem with that is like we're talking about a system. And most times you're not listening to it on a system. You're listening to it through, like for us, nice set of headphones. Most
Right.
people have AirPods, and they're all getting better. They all have representation, but their crossovers are all different. And so this is just like shooting into the barrel of like kind of accepted standards of things based off like knowing that your mix is going to be translated through any different type of system that's being played. Like people are going to be listening on freaking everything, and most people, to my chagrin, are listening on their iPhones. And
But do you think for like most subwoofers, the crossover is like well over 29, 30 hertz, right?
it can be. I mean, usually the
Or
sub crossover will do that, but it's because they're tuning it for the room. They're not tuning it for the mix. Like they're tuning it so that the low end and the bass itself can all go and drive into a sub. Like that's a very like live mix choice that when you're building a room, you're making it so that like you're having elements of your low end cut through a mix, but to the room, because it's like you want your crossover to be set differently depending on the room. Like when we were on tour, our front of house guy would go in every room, play Steely Dan because he knew that song like the back of his hand, and he would set his crossover and find out where the crossover A existed in their system, and then figure out where he needed to put his crossover so that he could get low end information out. But it's kind of like we can't use live context to dictate studio mixing because they're just very different elements involved. Like we're talking about a perfect, like I work on modeling headphones primarily because my room is like semi-treated to a degree. Um, and so you're mixing in a studio environment where those things are like you're learning your room and where you want them to cross over. And this is just broad concepts of things too. So it's like if you feel like you're listening on a system where you have the accessibility, where you could have two things exist in that space, that low end space, you can push this a little bit. It's just a good place to start, really. And it's about cleaning up potential masking that's happening in your mix. Like that's really what this is becoming about. It's about having elements come through cleanly and knowing where to start to allow those things to happen. So, where else are we? We got this. So as we're listening to this, we could very well sit and try to think about elements that we would want to effectively control in this low end bass. Like if this was a lot less dynamic, these are all pretty processed. You can tell based off the way that they all kind of look like, well, sausages. Sausages is generally a good compressed low end. But if they weren't, we would want to do something and clean it up a little bit as far as doing some multiband compression on it. And that'll bring me into my next concept, which is essentially what we call monofolding. If you're struggling with a mix, and this applies more for mixing bands than it does electronic music, because electronic music has the space and the luxury of working with MIDI based instruments, then and they're clean and they're coming out pretty much perfectly mixed as it is. This is what you're going to be kind of focusing on in a mix where you're using live elements and you're trying to control your low end if it's getting away from you. And the one thing you can try at this point, and it doesn't work in every set, like with every song contextually, but if you're mixing a live band, usually you can do something called just and put a multi-band on and start trying to tamper down these transients that are coming through and pushing, but you want to allow them a little bit more crush. The problem with this is I can get into the concept of this. I can't get too far into like audible application because as we can see, these are just like very well compressed already because they were MIDI, like and that was built in. But monofolding is another concept that we can talk about just really quick before I kind of start moving into a vocal thing because we are running low on time here. Monofolding is the idea that like was based in vinyl production back in the day, and it's because if you had a stereo image of a low end element of your mix, whether it was the bass or the kick, it would create too much depth in the essential like carving of the vinyl, the grooves, and needles would skip out and they'd fly out because the contrast with the width and the depth, which is how different frequencies are, going through a record player, would push the needle out. So what they did back in that day is they folded any kind of like stereo information on the low end into a mono signal. So that being said, you can do that. I know with Logic, you can do, obviously I use pretty much the whole FabFilter suite, but in Logic, you can at least cut out the mono by going into your EQ here. And this is what the mid side concept is essentially. Mid information being information that is being brought to you in the middle of the kind of 180 degree field, sides being the sides. When we cut the sides out of our low end on an element like this is, maybe I'll do this to everything just so we can maybe hear it. So I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed here. we cut the low end out of every element just on the sides, you're not really going to hear. For those of you listening on headphones, you might have heard things just feel like they narrowed. If you're listening on monitors, you probably get a similar feeling. Headphones, you're going to feel it, like get a lot more into that. But when we cut all this information out of the sides, it should feel like it's moving from all here to just kind of here. This can be a pretty big friend to you if you feel like you've got a really muddy mix and your low end is starting to get out of control. And by cutting however much, I mean, I think with the harmonics in this sub wobble wobble, whatever you might want to call it, we didn't even get kind of a really mono focus on it until 2K, just above. This is a easier situation. I know, like when I master for records for vinyl, I have to do this on the master itself so that the grooves don't skip my needle out and I get it sent back by the distributor all pissed off. So this is just another one of those things. It's like mono folding. If you guys use FabFilter, you can do the same exact thing. You can sit stereo placement side and then start pulling stuff out, side information. And then again, with mid-side EQ of any sort, you can do the exact same thing in inverse with top elements, percussive elements, give them a little shine on the sides so that you feel like your mix is getting wider. But that's how we generally would use something like that, mid-side EQ and mid-side like compression. You can do the same thing with the multi-band compressor to give you guys a little bit of space for your low end that might not be present.
So,
and then you can,
all right. Can I ask a question? All right, because I've heard about this, but it's not something I know a ton about. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around this.
Sure.
So are you kind of saying that basically within a mix, right? We have two speakers. I guess we often have two speakers, and so things can be anywhere in the stereo field, from straight down the middle to like hard pan. Let's start from that premise.
Yeah.
And then continuing is, you're kind of saying that, is it correct to think that what is being called the mid is basically when things are pretty much dead center in that stereo field and the sides are on the like hard pan, kind of on the outsides?
Yeah.
Okay, and if that's correct, and you're kind of saying that within this concept, you can process sounds particularly to be different in the mid or the sides. You can process it, and so in this case, you're kind of introducing the concept that bass instruments at times it might be useful to have them be more in the mid and less on the sides. Is this kind of the concept?
Absolutely. I think when you start balancing things, and from an audible perspective and just from like how our ears are even created, when we start spreading out low information to the left and the right, that's where we get this kind of feeling of muddiness. And like when you're doing a talk about cleaning and allowing low end to exist in a clean state against itself, you really have to be thinking about the context of where it sits amidst everything. Now, for this, we've kind of been focused on just listening to these two low end elements in it of themselves. But that's not typically how we mix, is like we get everything mixed to a place where it's balanced together, and then we make decisions as we listen to it against everything, because everything has odd touches and might have odd touches like of low end information and build and stuff. So that's why you'll see like in online tutorials of guys just going, well, if it's not a low end information, I sit and I can just cut out everything up to 80 hertz. You know, like if it's vocals, just cut that information out. Their goal and their thought being, I don't want any even just digital stacking or create information that's being created by having that there when it's not being utilized. Like it's not like and someone's voice, unless you're like a really incredible bass vocalist, exists in that frequency range. Most of them don't even touch it. So they just chop it out. I'm not saying that you have to do that either. I'm just saying that when we spread low end information out, that's where we get this kind of in a 180-degree field. It's much easier to hear, feel, and perceive low end as it's coming from you from the center. And then anything out on the sides is going to conflict with other information and create this muddy feeling because it's not focused. Because it's like, it is the slowest thing moving. It is also like the most perceivably loud thing moving because of its just properties as a wave. And so we're always accounting and making space for this. And the more we can do that by folding base signal into the center and just information too. Some of this stuff is not even necessarily audible to like a perceived space. What'll happen though is when you do that, if you're like, why does it sound so muddy? Well, maybe I should go back and just see if I can fold this bass signal or this electric bass, this upright, this whatever, this MIDI bass. Maybe I could fold some of that information closer into the center. And all of a sudden you'll notice that your sides open up. Anything panned hard left, anything hard right will start to speak louder in your mix. And then all of a sudden you can start turning those elements down so that they're not aggressive, harsh, pushing in your ears in a way where it's like, because what they were doing is they're just fighting against more information. All of this is always just cleanup. Like you're just cleaning things. It's a surgical way of cleaning things. Once you do that, then you can start being expressive with your mix and you can insert dynamics. But like most of what we're doing is listening for problems and solving them against a balanced mix. You know, so we've gain stage, we've put everything well balanced against each other, like this mix was when we first played it. It was like you could hear everything that was cutting through. There weren't any crazy surprises. There wasn't like, you know, and we could go back through and sit and ISO things out and you would just be like, oh no, I heard that. You know, it maybe not loud, but that's all just the subjective choices you're making as a mixing engineer. And you send it back to your client to get notes and they'll be like, I really love that fucking shaker. Why don't you turn that shit up? And so you turn it up because that's maybe not, that's not how you heard it, but that's how they heard it and they wanted it up there. And so that's fine. You know, like there's always room to move things around, but it's like, we're talking about low end problems that are pretty common. And I think sometimes, especially in like an element with an element of EDM, we can get bass sounds to sound so wide and so lush and create this bed of things, you know, for the rest of the mix to lie on. But we get a little overzealous. We allow too many of those elements to crowd the mix. And once we start doing that, that's why you're getting that muddy sound out of your low end. That's why you're losing your kick drum, is because your kick information is fighting against 4 different synths that are all padded out left and right, and the whole wobble and the whole wideness. And it's like, it feels good, but we lost our kick. We lost the one thing that's keeping time in this mix. Like, and so we need to find this balance. Like everything, if you're doing a good arrangement, everything in that arrangement is serving a purpose. Hopefully, you know what I mean? And that purpose, every single element deserves to be heard. And so low end, cleaning the low end is kind of the first step in doing that. And I hate to make it boring, but to be honest, it's like after we got a little bit of that kick out, took a little bit of that sub out, allowed those two things to exist because they were MIDI tracks, as long as they're balanced together and we can hear both of them in the context of the entire mix, I'm not doing anything to these bass elements. I cut this just for the sake of showing you guys something, but when I did that initial listen, all of these bass elements are untouched. Well, oh no, I put that on. Yeah. Nothing's added. Some channel.
How many, I'm curious, man. You give Thanaverse some basses, man, you might get a universe. How many basses do we got in this thing?
Counting right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Let's go. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, it was super fun to open that up and be like, well.
Wow.
But I was pleasantly surprised because the arrangement's really good. Like he knows how to work them, and some of these bass elements are stacked tonally. So it's like one tone from this bass doing the same exact part as another tone from this bass, and he's sandwiching them together to effectively get that sound. that he's looking for. So it's not all, it's not all the headache it first presented itself to be. Although I did like swear a lot when I first opened this, and I was like, dude, it took me like I think an hour and a half just to organize this session because there was just so much going on. There's so much going on. So, who's feeling good? Who's feeling confused?
Would you be
Who
up for soloing a few of those bass tracks so we can hear what the different
what he's
layers
doing with it? Yeah, why not?
It's a good idea.
Because I think he's got some sub down mixes, which he had different, and like there a lot of them are similar too. Here, this is very low. That's your sub. That was even lower. That's where his top exists. That gave it a little width, a little saturation. That effectively is kind of, I think, a main line that he added in. And this was a little, it gives it a sense of sharpness. Yeah. That's kind of the sharp element he put in there. Just, it cuts higher on the wobbles.
So do you think these are these all renders of like the same instrument but in different modes or something?
I think when I talked to him, he said he had a bunch of different elements kind of stacked against each other. And I can't tell you exactly what he did. I wish he was here so I could just ask him. But I think what he was doing is he was taking the same instrument, but like just augmenting certain things, like adding a little top to this one and then pulling out some of the low end and then having that be a track and then doing the same exact instrument, but then kind of switching that, where it's pulling some of the top end out, allowing that. And from a mix perspective too, that is nice. Like once you familiarize yourself with what each one of those things are doing, it allows you to control the tone of that instrument far more. Like
That's cool.
when I mix electric bass, I always double it, and then I EQ out all the top information from one and all the low end information out from the other. So now I'm working with a bass that's kind of two instruments, but I can add top. I can add, like, if I want more pluck, if it's like a finger style bass or a slap bass where you want some more percussion in there, I EQ out all the low information from one track, add a little saturation to the track that is like my high end, and I start balancing that against the low end, so I can shape the tone of it and control it far more. Because like if I kept it all as one signal, here I'd be adding more top information, but I might be adding like accidental harmonics into the low end information and creating this kind of crazy sound that then now I don't feel like I control when I add every other element in the mix. So
Would you do that? Would you do that even on like a kind of a like indie folk type of thing? Like, would you do that in some of your other productions or in like a sad song record? Would you actually do that with doubling the bass and
I
kind of
did it. I did it on every sad song record, like every
Interesting.
single one. Yeah,
Wow.
I think I've done it on every single bass, like electric bass I've recorded since in the last 10 years. I'm pretty sure it's just my method for low end shaping, because
Wow.
it's like I've just noticed, and what I'll do is I'll oversaturate and put a lot of like harmonic distortion on the top, and when you solo the bass in the mix, it'll sound distorted.
Hmm.
It sounds awful, I'll be honest. Like if you solo this, if you do this trick and you solo your bass is going to sound like you're in the wrong band. Like, like why on earth am I doing this really nice simple folk song and the bass sounds like it was like, recorded by Andrew Sheps and doing like a Soundgarden record, like, and then you blend it into the mix, all that distortion disappears, and all of a sudden you can just hear it. You can just feel, especially with upright, you can feel the plucks, you can feel the slides, you can feel all this, because all this top end information on a bass signal is typically far lower. I mean, we can look at even this one. It has enough low end information, not a ton, obviously. And this is it. Like down here is what I'm talking about. So I will take, oh, I'm on the wrong one, my bad. Common mistake. That makes more sense to me. This is where this low end instrument exists. So I would take this, move this out to like, sorry, mouse issues. Right? We can try this trick just for the sake of doing it right now. Take this at 4. Actually, I'll just go so I cut this out at 350. I'll double this. We'll do setting bass low. So now I can take this one signal that didn't have a lot of low end information to start. This is the low, this is the high. I have some saturation happening on this. Right? But I didn't like where it was sitting initially, like it was down here. And I wanted more and more low. But I still wanted this to cut through. Maybe I want that to cut through more. And I want less low because it's already competing now with this signal. And then it gets the whole mix. So that's another good way of playing around with bass that I didn't even anticipate talking about. But that's like a phenomenal way of doing it. If you look at these two EQ curves, you'll notice how they work with each other. Same signal, same everything. This one is existing. God damn. Sorry, my mouse keeps having a stroke. From 30 to 150 on this and 350 on this. It goes to 150 and then picks up at 350 because the crossover inevitably will still allow information from both to pass through. So you don't want to set this at 350 and this at 350 because then you're just like that little mid portion will have so much information because it's being represented in both EQs. Anyway, that's another great way of playing around with low end is splitting it. Like allowing yourself to shape the top of it without affecting the bottom or vice versa. And then like piecing these two things together in Logic, we can create a subgroup, which is Command Shift D for those of you that work in Logic. And for those of you that don't, you don't have to give a shit. I'm not asking you to. But what we would do is, take these two signals, maybe put, like this is a bus compressor, solid state logic. This is just a great glue compressor, and meaning it just glues essentially the two signals together a little bit. After you do that, where are you? I have a favorite one. There we go. This additional compressor that you add to both signals it's the same one, but you've chopped information out of one or other. So there's no like weird masking, phasing, anything like that, because it's just allowing you to articulate two different sides of the EQ spectrum. Once you glue it together, it will effectively bind those two signals together a little bit more in a compressive state, clamping them both down simultaneously and all that. And then it'll just sound like one true instrument. Doesn't sound like you've split it up or done anything wrong. So that's just another great way of working with bass. It works phenomenally with live track bass, but as you can see here, you can gather the same kind of results with the MIDI bass, with anything like that. So I guess to sum up this is like just come into mixing low end with like a lot of intentionality. Figure out what your lowest instrument is going to be. That's your first step. Out of all the low instruments that you want, what's the focus? Which one do you want to shine the most? Pay the most attention to that. Start cutting things out around it that don't need that information. Second thing you want to do, find balance in your stereo field with it. When you're listening to 180 degrees worth of music, figure out where in that 180 degrees do you want this kind of overwhelming low end to exist. If you want it against the whole 180-degree field, go for it. I'm not telling you not to do any of this stuff. Like, this is my way of doing it. This is really just kind of tips for ways to solve problems that you might run into. If you put it in a 180-degree field and you have no problems, you can hear the kick, you can hear the bass, everything else is coming out solid, don't touch it. Leave it the fuck alone. Don't put 17 plugins anywhere. Just stop and it'll be fine. Because like if it sounds fine, it is fine. So don't fix problems that aren't there. And if you want more control, double that signal. Make sure that you put a cut again, like one at 150, the other one at 350. High pass, low pass. You can cut the subs out of it if you want. That's like my setting for rock mixes. And then you can control your low end elements a little bit more. You can saturate the top, use harmonic distortion to get things to cut through. Those 4 totally spaced out ideas, use them together, and it'll actually do you a lot of good. I know I'm very scatterbrained. I apologize for that, but this is the nature of what I do. This is why I don't work with a lot of other people in the sense that I'm just always in my room, because no one could compete with this chorus. It's like, it's fucking ridiculous. So
Lucid, man. Seemed pretty lucid to me, man. Yeah,
I'm
you're
starting to shake off my nerves.
definitely not running for president of the ADD club, man. I got you're pretty lucid, man.
It's a controlled ADD, believe me, man. I'm medicated, but not with pharmaceuticals. Let's get into vocal mixing, because I think
Let's do it.
This is a really fun one, and it's really important, and we'll actually get to see things happen. So, Sierra, are you still with us? Did I lose you at all? Because we're about to make your. I think she gone. She gone. All right. She's missing me fucking around with her vocals. Let's do this.
Yeah, we're about to put a little water for you.
I'm learning every time I come around.
Yeah, if we could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego, give it the love it really needs, so we can let it go and breathe.
This is what it sounded like. And it doesn't sound bad. It's a clean vocal take.
Yo, if we could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song.
So usually when I get vocals, first thing I'm doing is figuring out what the style is, what the genre is. I think that's really important to do. And I think you should too. Listen to that genre, try to like soak yourself in it. Sierra also has like a very unique voice, and it's one that has a little bit more low information because she sings softly and she sings closer to a microphone. She doesn't sing so close that she's ruining and giving it a proximity effect, which is this is awful to mix out of your vocals. Get people, if you're recording vocals on your own, to step back from it, because I hate this. It takes far too long to remove out of signal. So get people to step back from it, turn up the gain on your system, and like make up for what you're not like a lack of feeling with, inherent volume that you can control. Second, with Sierra's vocals here, I can hear a lot of room sound.
Yo, if we could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
There's a slight kind of slap back happening. You can hear a room effectively.
Could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
It's ravel, babble.
Yo, if we could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
So I'm pointing that out because when you're listening to what you're about to work on, you should know kind of inevitably what problems you might run into. When we treat vocals, we're going to be compressing them. So we're going to be pulling things up that typically you wouldn't hear on a raw track, or might not hear that well on a raw track. They'll become incredibly apparent to you. So if you're getting a good sense of where these vocals sit, and again, like the difference between Sierra's vocals and Lavelle, who's with us earlier, who's still here, Lavelle has like a totally different vocal timbre. Hers is much more represented on the top. Like her voice cuts through a mix, and it is very fun to work with. But then the opposite end of that is where I have to get Sierra's vocals to cut, I have to get Lavelle's to cut less in like with harshness. So you're always going to have something with vocals and know that going in. And then also knowing that like Devin,
Oh, I'm learning every time I come around.
Devin has a totally different voice than Sierra. Don't do it the same way. Like there's no such thing ever as a vocal chain that you can download from some dude on YouTube and like plaster it to your vocals and it's going to sound great. It might, you got lucky. It probably won't. Like these, it's all context driven. So like don't watch this is my perfect vocal chain. It'll work for you. It's probably a good place to start, but don't do that stuff. Intention. Like I can't say it enough. Work with intention. So, Sierra's voice against the entirety of the mix without any treatment.
Oh, I'm learning every time I come around.
Yo, you could just let it unravel. Stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, singing into the song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego. We give it the love it really needs, so we can let it go and breathe.
Okay. That sounds like way better than I'm used to it here sounding when you first do the dry trick into vocals. So that's pretty rad. I think it probably has to do with the fact that I made Thane do a mix of vocal bus. No. All right, I did, but nothing's on there. So in these scenarios, when it's sounding pretty good as is, we're thinking about what do we want to do to make it sound a little better. First thing we're doing, I think, is just a little bit of pitch correction. I use it on every vocalist, myself included. It's not to be feared. We're not T-painting it. I'm not going to make this.
I'm learning every time I come around.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
I don't want that sound. So we're doing light tuning. She's the enunciation, the articulation of it is happening relatively quick. So even auto-tune at a fast setting isn't necessarily tracking everything that she's doing. It doesn't have enough time to pull the pitch down. So this is really broad, and it's just really just like, this is just kind of your first coat of polish. You know, this is not something that needs to be abused. Second, we're taking and we're going through, and the first thing I always do with the vocal is I EQ things out of it, not add into it. I'm a big believer in this kind of old school way of doing things where we do subtractive EQ, we do a little bit of processing, then we add things back to it. And this is, again, it's to have control. And it's the same thing I was doing with the bass, where I was splitting it into two channels. When you have more control over what elements of a vocal that you want to go in, you will have greater success in having it shine through a mix and not be harsh and not be overstated or washed or muddy. And you can change the tonality of it in a way that suits the genre even more. So the first thing I noticed when I was listening is because she was a little closer to the mic, there was this at about 200 hertz.
Yo.
You know, it's the part of her voice that sounds like it lives under a blanket.
We're stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego. Give it the love it really needs, so we
It's
can
not
let
doing
it
too
go and
much when I
breathe.
took that out, but it's doing enough where it just makes, if I take a little bit out of, sorry, I'm pointing at my screen. If I take a little bit out of this, I'm going to hear more of this. It's a balancing act. And what I'm trying to do is find the best representation of the balance in her own voice that exists amidst these two arguing qualities. So
Yo, if If we could just let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song.
That's
We
what
are
I'm
stronger than we
articulating.
think so.
And do this with plugins. Like over accentuate what you're doing so you can hear it, and then focus in on that part that you're hearing, and then start dialing it back. So if I'm sitting and thinking of like, where do I want to take out? I want to sit and I want to hear it loud, too loud first. I'm going to start this earlier.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego, give it the love it really needs, so we can let it go and
So
breathe.
just turn out, it's got to be what? I'm doing a dynamic push, I should mention, but we could just essentially take out 1.3 and do no dynamics. 1.5 decibels.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the
Yep.
song. We
And when I got it there, to my ears too, subjective, to my ears it sounded a little bit more balanced against the reference of the mix. There's a lot of low end information in the mix, so when I took a little
let it
when I took a
unravel.
little out of her voice, I could hear a little bit more of the top of her voice.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego.
So that too, the only other thing after hearing that were her, effectively her S's, her sibilants. And so that's why we have this up here. Yeah.
Let it
Yeah.
let it unravel. Song, we are stronger than we think so.
Sound that seemed to be cutting through a little heavy.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in
So
Babylon.
this is it with two
Stop
low.
all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into the song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego, give it the love it really needs, so we can let it go and breathe. Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
Okay, so pretty basic. All we've done is we've done a little bit of pitch correction up front, just to tame any kind of weird errant notes and slowly bring them back to center if we need it. Honestly, we don't really. It's just kind of something I always do just to get it done. We've taken a little bit of, low mids, lows out of her voice just to balance out the top, let a little bit of mid shine through. And we've taken care of some of the sibilance that's happening at about 8,500. 8K to 9K is typically where you'll run into sibilance. About 4K to 6K is where you'll run into nasal boxiness. 4 to 6 is harsh. And 6 to 8, 6 to 9 is pretty much where S and, those kind of really piercing sounds can exist. And everything else here is just the body of her voice. It's just the good stuff, as I like to call it, the sweet stuff. So then my next decision on this was to kind of touch into what Nate and I were talking about earlier, which is analog coloration. Now that I've taken stuff out of her voice, I want to find a way to balance the dynamic range of it. I don't know how much, I think this is a very varying degree thing with most people, but compression confuses the shit out of everybody, and I understand that to be true, and believe me, it's okay. Like, it's confusing because I think the thing that people and most often fail to explain about a compressor is that it does a lot of things. It does one thing, but it really does a lot of things. And in order to use a compressor really well, you have to know what you're doing with it. So in this one, I was just trying to balance her vocal dynamics a little bit, just a touch, because they didn't need much. We look at this. If we saw dramatic peaks and valleys, there would be an issue. But these stems came a little pre-compressed. I'm just, now that I've taken stuff out, I'm trying to find and shorten the gap between things. So I took an old Fairchild 660 compressor, which is an old analog compressor. You can do this with any compressor. You can do this with the stock Logic ones. They have great FETs and vintage compressors and all that will color the sound in a similar way. I like a fair chat.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
I've set my threshold and I've set my input gain so that essentially I'm only getting about 2 decibels of compression.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song. We are stronger than we think so.
And so it's not an audible amount. You can kind of tell, but I barely hear it, and I've been doing it for years. I don't expect anyone else to. Like, it's when you're compressing this much, what you're doing is smoothing a signal. You're just smoothing it out. And this helps with her vocals because her vocals are smooth. Like, her delivery is smooth. I'm mixing against the intention of the artist, and like Sierra has a gorgeous, smooth voice, and she enunciates well against it. So it's like I don't have to do anything to this other than just accentuate the qualities of her voice that make it beautiful in the first place. So we're smoothing it out. This is the next step I have. A Pultec, what Nate was showing his phone at earlier, whatever that was. This isn't great EQ, but this is just to add stuff back. I've taken out things. I've taken out a little of her lows, and I took out lows at about 200. I still don't feel now.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song.
There was an element of her voice that I was missing because I had taken it out. But I had taken it out in such a way where I was like balancing things. Now I'm trying to add things back in because I can control how much I add in. This is all just, I know then this is like, well, why would you do that? Why would you just add this in or blah, blah, blah. This is all just a step-by-step way so you can really pull the best out of the vocals that you're trying to.
Let it unravel.
So with her, I added about 3 decibels at 100, and I attenuated it was about 1, so it's just got a little bit wider of a bandwidth. And it creates this kind of up-down motion. And then I boosted it at 12. I wanted to give her a little clarity, a little shine on the top.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song.
So we like that. We can hear.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song.
So that's like where I liked it. I'm like, that sounds harsh and too much, but pretty. It doesn't.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble.
It makes them sound clear, up front, all in your face kind of thing. And then since I was like, that's where I want to be shooting.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to.
Just start rolling it off until I get to like, oh, that's nice. It has the quality that I was looking for, but it's not too much. And here we are. But what that did though.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence.
If we added 12K in, all of a sudden, those S's start becoming problematic again. So we added a de-esser to pull those out one more time.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song.
De-esser is just there to be your friend. It's just a little multi-band compressor that pulls S sounds out of it. It's named as it does. You can tell it's a de-esser because of what it is. It's just there. Use it. They're great. The only other things with her vocals, because they were so like lovely and simple and easy to mix, I wanted them to cut through the mix a little bit without adding volume. So I'm going to go back to that whole trick that we were talking about with the low end. Saturation.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living.
This is a tube saturator. It is warm sounding. Those are the characteristics of it. It adds a little harmonic distortion. I love this one because I can take its response out of the bass a little bit. But essentially, it's just exciting the vocals, making them clear, cut, crisp, cut through the mix, and it doesn't do too much.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all the violence, get back to silence, sing it into this song. We are stronger than we think so. May we learn to love our ego.
Again, just over accentuate something that you want to play around with, and then dial it back as soon as it sounds like you're there and you've got what you needed. And then this wasn't doing anything. All right.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon. Stop all.
Here's something I didn't touch on earlier that everybody here will benefit from. This is a legit just trick. And so utilize this trick because it's fun. And I've taught Adam this, and I think it's stuck. Balance your mix quiet. Turn this shit way down and figure out where your levels are. Don't try to balance your mix with it blaring in your face. You should be able to have a conversation with someone in the room, listen to your mix, and balance it all at the same time, and not be able to hear the dude not to your left, not be able to hear the mix. Balance those things. So get the volume down really low.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in Babylon.
Notice that if I bring it down here, we can still hear kind of everything, but we do know that Sierra's vocals are what we're hearing. The less audio information I give it, we'll learn what the loudest parts of it are by when we turn it down. I can hear a little bit of that bass. I could hear a little bit of that kick, tiny bit, and I can hear vocals. Don't mix it this quiet. I'm just trying to prove a point. The idea is when you mix quiet, you'll get a better sense of what elements are sitting out in front of your mix as versus the ones that are sitting behind your mix and in the back of your mix. This is how I balance my vocals in a mix. I just turn it down. Turn it way down. And then start playing with your balance. Like in that, I know that this is kind of more of remix. I know that in this space, vocals have a tendency to sit on top of the mix rather than in the mix. This is dictated by the genre, dictated by hip hop, dictated by, kind of electronic music with vocals. They sit above. It's a more pop appropriation of clean vocals. That's like what the genre calls for. So I know I like them where they're at. That feels a little better. It feels a little more in it than on top of it. Because what we'll do then is once we turn this up,
Believing under the surface, the mask we wear. There is a love to which nothing compares. Tangled and past until we dismantle. Grounding this now till we get a handle. Facing this.
And then all of a sudden when I got it loud, I noticed that certain elements were conflicting. So I'll just kind of split the difference, bring it up a decibel.
Let it unravel, stop all the babble, living in.
If you're struggling to balance your vocals, just do that. I promise. You'll save yourself so much time. It's just turn things down. Do your balancing act with use that trick. Turn your monitors down if you're balancing. Turn your headphones down. Think to yourself, if I was talking to my boy just sitting across the room, could we have a conversation and I could still hear this mix, and him and I could still chat? If you're mixing in that space, you're saving your ears, and then you're also finding a really good place to know where things are sitting in your mix. So balance low, and then when you're ready to do details,
let it unravel.
Then crank that shit. Have fun with it. Knock, blow the back out the car. Who gives a shit? Get loud. Have fun. And then take breaks because you're going to fry your ears. But that's kind of one of the best tricks I ever got taught was in a studio. And I was mixing something and my mentor came in and was like, turn this shit down. Your vocals are way too loud. And I was like, no, they're not. They sound amazing. He's like, everything sounds amazing when you are pushing it through really nice monitors. Turn it down. And I turned it down and I got it so low. And the only thing I could hear was my vocals. The entire mix disappeared. And so then when I put it through other systems, the vocals were just hot as shit. And you couldn't even hear the backtrack. You could, but not nicely. It wasn't balanced by any means. So I do this with all elements. In this space too, there's another thing that to be noted. If you work with a more of a hip hop space or elements of hip hop infused into the genre, three things kind of have to line up with themselves: the kick, the snare, and the lead vocals. They all want to sit relatively at the same volume. I think it's just because that's how it's always been. But honestly, when you're working in a hip hop space with hip hop vocals, those three things, when they line well together, give it a sound of a hip hop mix. It's just kind of how that's run. So I usually will do that. I'll turn it down really low and I'll make sure I can just hear my kick and my vocals and my snare sound. And this, it's there's no snare, there's a knock and a smash sound. I don't even know what you call it. But they're loud enough. I don't think I had balanced that out to this point. So I think I was working on this with Thane. I was just teaching him these concepts, and we hadn't really gotten to that part yet. But I could hear the kick, and I could hear those vocals, and they were all sitting a little bit more in the front of the mix. So that kind of wraps it up for Sierra's vocals. The only difference with Devin's vocals is Devin's got a very different voice. So we're going to have to take things out of Devin's vocals. We're going to add things out, and they're going to be in conflict to Sierra. So with this, I know that I have the first thing out in this is I bus mixed his vocals because it's his main and a double. So I took those two things. In Ableton, you can do this. I know for a fact. I would consult a tutorial, but just bus mix Ableton. You'll find it. Devin, because of his doubles, I wanted them to sound like one, more so like one voice. So I took a bus compressor. It's a little bit of glue. It's a very long attack, meaning it takes a long time for the compressor to be triggered by it, but it's a very short release. It's on auto, but if you're doing glue, it's usually a shorter release. 4:1 ratio, so not super aggressive. It's not like it's taking for every 1 decibel, pulling 4. 1 decibel over, pulls 4 out. And then I'm looking for
I'm learning every time I come around. And I'm learning every time I come around.
I'm shooting this meter to about 2-3 decibels. That's what I'm shooting for. It just glues them, snaps them together, makes them sound a little bit more like a solid unit. That was the first thing I wanted to do with Devin's vocals. The next thing I wanted to do, again, was just kind of listen to his delivery.
Well, you could let it all
Let's pull
unravel,
all this stuff out.
and you could let it all unwind.
So
And if you empty out the contents,
the thing with Devin's
then you will
vocals,
find out what's inside.
it's actually he was farther back from the microphone. He doesn't have as much of this sound, and it's affected how we perceive his vocals as a double.
Well, you could let it all
Now,
unravel.
that's not to say, Devin, were you up close to the microphone on this? Out of curiosity.
It's been a minute since we recorded it. I don't remember if Adam had me super, super close to it.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe about like a fist and a half away.
Yeah, that's enough. Like it's so crazy because like honestly, a fist and a half away is actually a pretty good memory. 2 fists away from measurement. This is about a good space to get enough low end out of the vocals without sacrificing any of the top or bottom. And it's kind of like when I talk about being too close to the microphone, like we're talking a matter of inches. Like this will sound different in a mix than this. That'll sound different in a mix than this. Mic proximity is a really important thing. And that's why what I'll do to trick vocalists into feeling like they're on top of the microphone, I'll put the pop filter way out. And it just gives them something to lean into so they feel like they're on top of it without sacrificing all the space I need so that I can get low end out of their vocals so it doesn't crowd the whole thing.
What would
And
you
because you do-
generally what would you generally recommend? And like obviously this is somewhat contextual, but what would you generally recommend as like a distance for studio recording on a mic?
Depends on the mic.
What about a SM7 like that?
An SM7 about where I'm at right now. So about
Which is what, 8 inches?
8 inches, 8 to 10.
Yeah.
On a large diaphragm condenser, it's way more sensitive, and it's obviously a cardioid pattern that accepts a lot more. This is a dynamic, so this is shooting, if I'm off a little bit, everything's going to change just a little bit. So that's the other thing. If you're working with an artist and they're working with a dynamic microphone, make sure they're pointing at it or slightly off axis just to account for sibilance. If they're working with a cardioid, they have a little bit more freedom with where they can move their head. But at the same point in time, you'll still want them about a foot off of it because it's so sensitive and it'll pick up so much of their voice. And all those inches on a dynamic microphone turn into centimeters on a large cardioid. So it's like a lot of like talking about a vocalist, like most of, it's so frustrating to me when I was younger and learning how to do this because I was very much the type to slap up a microphone, track into it, and be like, dude, I'll fix it later. It's fine. You know what I mean? And after 20 years of doing this, however effing long, I realized most of what you're doing should be really like locked in just the recording of it. Like this tonality will affect the entire song versus this tonality. This is going to be a lot clearer. This is going to be a lot easier to mix. Like this is going to give you some issues. Or if you're doing hip hop though, you might want this. Like you might want a little bit of body in it and a little bit more guttural because it's like if Devin's going hard in it and like really it's got a verse with like a lot of like cut, a lot of syllables, a lot of chop, and he's enunciating well and all this. If he's too far back, you might lose some of that kind of impressive like power to the vocals. So you might want him a little closer, and then you might want to just pull out a little bit more bass. Like it's you thinking about, we're always thinking about the final result, like all the way back in the tracking stages. Like like always have an idea of where you want the timbre sonically to be, and then make choices around that. That's like what a producer does in studio, at least during the recording process, is you're making decisions to alleviate steps and pulling steps from you, like from your workflow. You're thinking about engineer Carl 2 weeks from now when you're done tracking this, and you're like, I want to. That poor guy, he gets headaches a lot. I don't want to give him another one. Like you're doing that because we can solve problems before they arise, and that's going to be done in tracking. So Devin, like his mic placement on this is really nice because I'm listening to it right now.
Well, you could let it all
There's like,
unravel.
it's a great dry signal. That doesn't mean that it's like perfect, but it's a great dry signal because it's very malleable. So the first thing to manipulate in his vocals is this low end that was sitting there,
Let it all
and it has
unravel.
less to do with how close he was to the microphone. It has more to do with the fact that there's two of them, and I'm processing
Well, you could let it all
both
unravel.
at the same time because I have them grouped and glued together so that they feel like a more cohesive unit. And because of that, we've established that there's just a little bit more sonic build in this low end that is natural. So we're checking that out right here.
Well, you could let it all unravel.
It's just that kind of muddiness that occurs from
Let it
stacking
all
vocals. It's pretty normal. And then we did the same thing we did with Sierra. We just chopped a little bit of that sibilance out. You'll notice this isn't like this stuff that I get all the time. This is what I'm used to seeing.
Well,
And
you
then they're
could
like, well,
let
it
it
sounds a
all
little nasally.
unravel.
And I'm like, yeah, because you just needed this. Don't make problems. Again, I don't, I'm going to say that until the cows come home. But like, don't do the thing where you're sitting there and you're scooping frequencies trying to find a problem. This whole trick where everybody's always doing this online, like, well, that's the problem right
Well, you
there.
could let it all unravel.
If you don't hear it in your mix,
And you
it's not a
could let it
problem. You know, it's just not like you're just complicating something that just doesn't need to be complicated because you're looking for things. Well, there's a room resonance there. Is the room resonance present in your mix? Is there another instrument with that same room resonance that's conflicting with this? If there is, then do that. Then take it out. But that's an intentional move. Like you made the decision to do that because you were hearing it. If you're not hearing it, it's not a problem. Like, and this goes with vocals too. Like vocals are intimidating, but they're not impossible. And they're only intimidating is because you can make a lot of mistakes. The way to alleviate making a lot of mistakes is make really subtle, soft moves. Just be gentle with them and make really subtle. A decibel can make one like the. Take it easy, Nick. Good to see you, Brand. A decibel is the difference between like a really solid sounding vocal and something that just isn't as great. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just like these are the little things. So we did the same thing with Devon's on these too. We put that Fairchild on because I wanted the timbre of them to sound similar.
Well, you could let it all unravel, and you could let it all unwind.
But again, you'll notice this compressor's doing nothing. It's taking decibel out. It's really just adding some color, which is pretty inaudible, but adding a little bit of color and compressing them, gluing them, allowing them to exist in one space, like one instrument, a little bit more. That being said, we've taken a bunch of stuff out. I wanted to add some stuff back in. So,
well, you could let it all unravel, and you could let it all unwind.
I went through and I was just sweeping on from no sub. I wanted a little bit of 130 in because we had taken some out. I wanted to control how much.
Well, you could let it all unravel,
A little bit of 320.
And you could let it all unwind.
A little bit of 8.
And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside.
We kept 2000. We left it alone because if we added too much, it gets nasally a little bit.
Well, you could let it all
The beginning of nasally, because again, nasal really hits at about 4,000 to 6,000 hertz.
Well, you could let it all unravel.
And we did 5. We added 2 decibels in, and we added 3 decibels in at 12.5 for what we would call airiness, some clarity, just sparkle. Once we did that,
well, you could let it all unravel.
I noticed that we had kind of the same problem that we did with Sierras when we added some of that 12.5 in, right over here. We just added some S's. So we DS those out. It's not doing anything, it really.
Well, you could let it all unravel.
Contents.
And you could let it all
There we go.
unwind.
Yeah.
And if you empty out
Just
the
pulling
contents,
about 2 decibels out. All this is
then
in
you will
such
find out
subtle,
what's
soft
inside.
movements. If you recorded the vocals even semi-decently, you're not going to be it's not necessary to do a lot of things. And mixing is not a lot about doing a lot of things. It's just about finding problems, solving them, balancing, and then making it dynamic, like adding your little touch into it, putting sweeps, putting pans, having fun, really, giving it depth, all that sort of thing. Again, I added a little saturation to color it. Gives it just
well, you could let it
break
all
up in those lower
unravel.
mids.
Well, you could let it all unravel.
Just
Well, you
enough.
could let it all
And
unravel.
then I think I did this just so I'd meter it. Yeah, just so I could see what it looked like. And then when we put it in the entire mix,
Well, you
old
could
Devon
let
sounds
it
great.
all unravel. And you could let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside. And you could let it all unravel.
And
And you could let it all unwind.
that's about a
And if
good
you
volume.
empty out the contents,
I can hear
then
him
you will find out
perfectly.
what's
I can hear the
inside.
wobble. I can hear the kick.
And you could
Hear
let it
like
all
the snare
unravel.
pad sounds. So the balance of it's sitting pretty well. We jack that back up. Really just lay into it.
Well, you could let it all unravel. And you could let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find out what's inside.
So that's kind of like very, very basic vocal chain ideas. Is start with subtractive EQ, add some compression back in so you can balance this vocal signal out, add some additional top EQ, like or additive EQ, add some signal back in, color it the way you want to, depending on how it sits in relative to the mix. Make sure you've de-essed it. Then add some color to it, warmth, saturation, overdrive, whatever. And then the last thing you want to do is just give it depth, reverb. Time effects are what creates space in a mix. So it's like, if I want something to feel farther back, I'll add a long reverb and let it go farther back. Or add so much of that vocal that it feels farther back. If you wrap it in reverb, it will inevitably move away from you. If you add subtle amounts of reverb like we have here,
well, you could let it all unravel, and you could
that's
let
right
it
up
all
here. That's dry.
unwind.
Added a little bit to 15, which is a Valhalla remake at 1.18 seconds.
Well, you could let
Just
it all
enough to make it
unravel.
just go slightly back. Then we added a little bit more to 16, which is a longer reverb, just a second longer.
Well, you
And
could
now
let
it
it all
fits
unravel.
more in the space of the actual
And you-
mix. And all together,
Well, you could let it all unravel, and you could let it all unwind. And if you empty out the contents, then you will find
So,
out what's inside.
that's about what I got, but I would love to open it up if you guys have things with vocals that you run into often, problems that you see, or if anything I've touched on kind of got your brain peeking in a different direction where you're like, oh, well, shit, I've thought about this before. How would you go about doing that? I'd love to open it up to you guys and just tackle any kind of vocal stuff, or if you still have questions lingering from low end, feel free to throw them out. But yeah, it's on you guys. I'm happy to show you the little tips, tricks, anything I can think of to maybe solve some problems you've run into with your own music or music you guys work on with friends.